This one is tough. There is a lot of very intense science going on here, and then the reason that the right answer is right on this is not obvious. So we're gonna have to we're gonna have to marshal all of our SAT strategies to help us get this very difficult pair of questions right. So remember, whenever we have line references in the choices, we can use the chronology rule to kind of guide us a little bit. And it's not foolproof, but especially if we're confused, it's something. It might nudge us towards the right answer, and it makes it a better bet. So how would it work here? We've got a lot of weird stuff going on. Now look, if I go to the surrounding questions, 43 was about line 40. And then for number 45, we kind of used that fact to kind of nudge us in the right direction, but we were very certain that line reference C was correct for number 45. If you watched that video, you saw we were very confident in that answer, and this helps us. This is going to play into the chronology rule. So 48 to 53 is the line reference that comes before this one. So 48 to 53, that would be right here. So that's question number 45, right? So that's right between choices B and C. And then if we go to the next question, 48, it talks about the last paragraph, which doesn't have a line reference in the question, but we know from this that the last paragraph is going to be this kind of big thing. I know there's a break there, but that's because it breaks over the page a little bit. So it starts up here, and that's kind of what, 64 to 83. So that doesn't really help us because that would include this line reference. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do number 40, what is that, 8? So what does this all mean? If you're an experienced SAT veteran, that tells you that line references A and B don't really match with the chronology of the passage, right? Those would be before the most recent line reference, which is this number 45. So we would expect the answers to 46 and 47 to be between 45 and 48. And so that would mean that C is very likely, and then D is kind of weird because it's within the paragraph that number 48 tells us to look at. But that's okay, right? There's a little bit of overlap sometimes, especially when we're talking about big paragraphs, so that wouldn't bother me. But if I were really stuck and I had to guess, I would put my money on either choice C or choice D. Those are, based on SAT strategies only, the best bets. But now let's actually try to do the question and see if we can get the lines to support this idea and see how we might use all this information together. The author notes that one reason Higgs's theory gained acceptance was that it. Okay, so Higgs's theory is gaining acceptance. Why? 36 to 39. We're still going to read those ones even though we think they're probably wrong. So 36 to 39 is right here. Push on a fundamental particle in an effort to increase its speed, and according to Higgs, you would feel this drag force as a resistance. Justifiably, you would interpret the resistance as the particle's mass. Well, here's the thing. That is telling me what Higgs' theory is, but it's not saying why it was accepted. So I don't care about this. This is just clearly wrong. It has nothing to do with the actual question. So I expected it to be wrong. Sure enough, it is. 43 to 45. That is here. Its interaction with the watery environment has the effect of endowing it with mass, so with particles submerged in the Higgs field. Well, this is very similar to the problem with A. This is also a what choice, right? So it's telling me more about the theory, but it's not telling me why it was accepted. So as expected, those two choices are just very, very bad. So did I need to do this chronology stuff to know that? Probably not. But it's a reassurance. And when the passages are difficult and, we've got a lot to consider, I want to take as much evidence as I can that I'm on the right track. So it reassures me. All right, now 55 to 63, kind of a long line reference there. But now we're in the territory which you might like, oh my gosh, is it the whole paragraph? Yeah, it's that whole paragraph. Okay. So what is this? We need to be about why it gained acceptance. But Higgs persevered, and his revised paper appeared later that year in another journal. So, okay, it's in a journal, so that seems pretty good. And physicists who took the time to study the proposal gradually realized that his idea was a stroke of genius, one that allowed them to have their cake and eat it too. In Higgs's scheme, the fundamental equations can retain their pristine form because the dirty work of providing the particles' masses is relegated to the environment. I do not understand the last 4 or 5 lines of that passage, of that paragraph, but I do understand the word acceptance matches with the words appearing in a journal and stroke of genius, right? That has nothing to do with Higgs or the field or the particles or the equations. It has nothing to do with science at all. It has everything to do with just like normal, like talking about science. That's why these science passages usually aren't as bad as they seem. We know the other stuff. We might not know the science, we know the other stuff. Let's look at line reference D though, just to make sure. 78 to 83. That's right here. Yeah, D. On occasion, that happens in physics. Mathematical equations can sometimes tell such a convincing tale. They can seemingly radiate reality so strongly that they become entrenched in the vernacular of working physicists even before there's data to confirm them. Okay. Well, it does seem to be talking about gaining acceptance. It's a little bit less obvious than the other one, but it's convincing. It radiates reality. That's very poetic. Physicists seem to be involved. We're talking about it being confirmed. So this might be right. I don't really know. I like the other one better. It seems to be talking about the exact moment when people realized it was a valid theory, and that seems better. So that's okay. I'm going to leave D in just in case, but C seems to be the answer. Now let's start looking at these answer choices and see if we can make more sense of the parts in C that I didn't understand. Right? So that's okay. I don't care that I didn't understand it. I'll figure it out, or at least I trust that I will. So let's see. So one reason the theory gained acceptance was that it let scientists accept 2 conditions that had previously seemed irreconcilable. Oof. So that means 2 contradictory things are now coming together. So what's my evidence of that? It's a stroke of genius. It allowed them to have their cake and eat it too. I don't know why there's cake involved. In Higgs' scheme, the fundamental equations can retain their pristine form because the dirty work of providing the particles' masses is relegated to the environment. So notice, what's the main thing that I'm seeing? 2 conditions that used to be irreconcilable, right? That means that they can't mix. They can't be reconciled. So I'm looking for things that are like opposites. And right here they're using the word pristine, which means perfect, clean, pure, and the word dirty, which obviously is the opposite of that. So they're saying his equations let them be clean and dirty at the same time. I don't understand how that's possible. I don't care. There's 2 words that seem irreconcilable, and yet they're in the same exact sentence, and we're talking about the equation being valid and accepted. So this seems like it could work. I don't understand enough to be confident, but that's okay. I found something to go off of. So let's look at B. It introduced an innovative approach that could be applied to additional problems. Well, here's a big issue. I did not see them talking about additional problems at all, right? Even in line reference D, they seem to be talking about the same thing the whole time. Higgs's theory, they're not introducing other stuff. So that is obviously wrong. Even though A is not obviously right, B is obviously wrong. C, it answered a question that earlier scientists had not even raised. Well, that may be true, but the lines here do not say that. It does not say that this was a new question that was being asked. It kind of comes up in previous line references from other questions, but we need the line references here to talk about that, and they're not doing that. So it's saying that there was a stroke of genius. It kind of allowed them to solve a problem. So it doesn't say anything about this being something that no other person had thought of. The problem being something that no other person had thought of. The solution, yes. Only Higgs has thought of that. So it's flipping it around. Higgs had an original idea, but it was to solve a problem that other people seem to have known. And at least we don't have evidence of the opposite here. D, it explained why 2 distinct phenomena were being misinterpreted as one phenomenon. So that seems very similar to A, right? They both kind of have this idea of 2 things. The difference is that A wants to take 2 things and say that are opposites and say they can work together. D is saying that 2 things that are completely separate are actually not. They're actually one thing. And so that is not really what they're saying here, right? They're not saying that there's 2 things they're talking about two problems kind of working themselves out. And so that it's not, the real issue here is it's not really phenomenon. It's not like there's an actual thing that was being confused as two separate things. It's kind of one thing. This whole idea of the field and this equation is really just like one phenomenon. No one thought it was two things. It had a problem in that there was these two qualities, the pristineness of the equations and the dirtiness of whatever the physics is. That's not the same thing as saying that there's two separate things. Kind of, you have to look at this as the difference between adjectives and nouns. Choice D is saying there's two things, two nouns. Choice A is saying it's the same thing, but there were these two adjectives that didn't seem to describe it because they're opposite adjectives, and yet Higgs figured it out. So this is A being the answer, and that matches, like I said, with line reference C, which is what I expected. So I want to add one little piece to this because I do think there is more evidence that A is right, but I think it's easy to miss. Allow them to have their cake and eat it too. This is a very common English phrase, and it basically means exactly what line reference A or choice A is saying here. All right, two conditions that seem irreconcilable. Because think about this phrase. If you have your cake in front of you on a plate, and it's sitting there, and it's nice and pretty, and you're taking Instagram pictures of it, you cannot have the cake in front of you and make it look pretty, and at the same time be eating the cake. Because once you take that first bite of the cake, it no longer looks pretty, and you no longer have cake, because the cake is inside of you because you ate it. So this is a common phrase that means exactly what the choice means. You can't have something and you have the cake and eat it too, because once you eat the cake, you no longer have cake. The cake is gone, you have eaten it, and it is being digested. Same thing here. He's found a way to mix two things that seem like a contradiction, and he's found a way to make it work. So it's more evidence. I get why for many people that would not be an obvious connection, because it's a phrase you might not know if English isn't your first language, or even if it is, you might have never really thought about what that phrase means. But it's more evidence in addition to this pristine, dirty thing to really put us in that direction. Tough question, tough set here. Not a place where you want to spend a lot of time if you're running short, but notice with a few little words and SAT strategies here, we were able to kind of narrow our focus down very quickly. So maybe, with the chronology rule, you get yourself down to choices C and D here. Maybe with strong words, you get yourself down to choices A and D here. And so now you're down to a 50-50 on these two questions, and that is good. You might still get them wrong, but you've increased your odds remarkably. And so little things can add up over the course of a test, and you might still get a lot wrong, but you're going to get more right than if you were guessing completely randomly. So use strategies when you can to just kind of chop away some answers and give yourself a little bit of a better advantage when you guess.